Dimple, your board experience also, I think, comes from a different perspective. I think it's really worth sharing that as well.
Oh, thanks, Dineshi. Sure. So I was a female entrepreneur myself in the late 90s in the dot-com boom. So I knew what it was like to fundraise, but then also have people around my board and the interplay there. I think through being an entrepreneur, I realized I wanted to be an investor. I wanted to be deploying the capital instead of always asking for it. And I thought I'd like to be on multiple board seats as an investor. I don't have to just be at one company. So I, like most private equity venture capital investors, buy my way into boards. So I've been the only female often on boards. And I think when you have an equity stake, it gives you some gravitas. You have a reason for being there. And then I always, the role I play on the board differs depending upon the composition of other members of the board. So I think it's always great to see what is your unique capability when you join a board. And that can come from your specific vantage point, whether it's your own personal skill set or personality or background, or what your firm is representing. So if you're an emerging markets expert, maybe you'll advise on cross-border insight and things like that. And at the private company level, we didn't really have committees because the boards were relatively integrated. But I think now, as I'm starting my first crack at a public board seat, it's an entirely different playing field. And I think you have to be a lot more strategic when you want to be invited onto a board as opposed to buying your way in, or, serendipitously, falling into it, or having someone seek you out. And I've definitely learned some tactics, which I'll share along the lines of the questions that I've been asking. But I think we already actually have some questions, which is great. Elisa, hi, how are you? Do you want to ask your question just to keep it more interactive? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think people talk a lot about governance, which was my first question. I have worked in executive teams, and I think governance means different things to different people. So could you just explain a bit more about what you mean by governance, and the difference that you see from the perspective of looking at governance from a board member versus governance from an executive?
Sure, really good question. So kind of amongst our audience, each of you will have a sense of what that word might mean. I want to go back to the kind of where does the word governance come from, right? Because that's at the heart of it. And it comes from the Greek word kubanao, which means to steer, as in, steer a ship. Yeah. And that is about making decisions about where we're headed, what's our destination. So you could, the analogy could be strategically, where's the flag on the hill that we're moving towards, and then how do you actually then steer and course correct based on the headwinds and the tailwinds that you might face along that journey. That's the core of what it means to govern. Now, who does that in an organization? The executive, absolutely, the CEO and her team. The board, yes, to a degree, but the board are not an actor within the business, right? So the board's role in governance is almost like the conscience of the company. And the board is appointed, let's be honest, by the shareholders. That is potentially going to change in the world in the next 10 years, right? And they can be fired by the shareholders. So every year you'll get through your pensions, should we reappoint these chairmen, and you get to choose, right? That's a really active thing that you can get involved in. It's not active enough. And your role as steward, and Dimple, in your time, you may have fired the odd CEO, kind of sitting on a board, right? That is the ultimate role that the board plays. They can't steer and navigate that ship day to day, but they can appoint a new captain or ask for other executives to be appointed. So that's the role that the governance of a board plays. But the executive make the day-to-day decisions, and a good board and a good executive will do that in a very cohesive and open way. So the board, the executive will consult the board on strategy, not say, here's a pre-packaged strategy, just approve it, please, so that we can spend this £100 million on this acquisition. No, a good executive will go, okay, we want to grow. Actually, one of the most effective ways for us to do that internationally is to acquire a company. What do you think about that, board? And they have a discussion and a dialogue. The board get to shape that. And there's a really great joint responsibility for that piece of work. That's how a good board works. And that's what it means to govern. So that's a slightly abstract analogy with that sort of ship in the Mediterranean being governed. A more realistic thing is that I think it's more helpful for you to think about what would governing as a board member entail for you. There are two essential duties that a board director has. The first is steering. So back to that analogy, but steering is ultimately about decision making or shaping. So that's the first duty, and being accountable for the decisions when they go awry, because they go wrong, right? And we hear about all those scandals. So it's being able to step up and kind of go, yeah, we made a bad call there. The second is supervising. So this is seeking assurance that the organization is delivering on its promises. The promise can be the in-year plan to achieve financial numbers. It can be the promise they make to society in terms of reducing their carbon footprint. It can be the promise they make to their employees in times like COVID, a duty of care towards their customers and employees. It can be any one of those things. And if management aren't doing those things well, and as a board member, if you're not satisfied that they are supervising the company well, they can intervene and take action. So steering and supervising are your two principal duties. Now, these are big responsibilities, right? You take, Dimple's desire to kind of be on a publicly listed firm. That is a big responsibility these days. I just want to draw a little pen portrait. 10 years ago, being a board member of a UK PLC, or think about the biggest companies in your kind of area, wherever you are in America or India, kind of meant, I'm sort of coming up to retirement. I don't want to leave the world of business. This is all about ego, by the way. I kind of want to have my finger in a few pies. I talk to a few friends, you get nominated onto a board, you sit back, relax, go to some nice dinners, go to some nice places across the globe. Yeah, that kind of board member, that kind of responsibility today is outmoded in most Western countries. I don't know how it works in Asia. I'm going to confess, I really don't know what the feeling is like. Today, if you want to become a board member of a financial services company in the UK, you need to get ready for about 6 months worth of due diligence done on you as an individual, right? You will be interviewed by at least 2 regulators, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, and the PRA. If you are chair of the audit committee, your history as a CFO will be interrogated. And that is even if your chairman who wants to appoint you to their board really, really want you, you might not meet the mark when it comes to these other regulators. This is also true in the US and probably on the continent as well. Dimple, I don't know, probably in Amsterdam as well, right? So that is, you got to ask yourself, do I want that job with all the responsibilities that comes with? Can you get thrown in jail if you get it wrong? Technically in the UK, you can, right? So like that's the consequence of getting it wrong. It's a big job. And don't do it lightly. The other non-financial services, I think the thing here is everyone's heard about Rio Tinto. That decision that seemed quite innocuous, that led to some heritage Aboriginal sites being blown up down in Australia. The CEO left. The chairman, I'm not sure quite whether, yes, I think kind of basically it also left. The board is tainted. You try as a member of that board to get another appointment, someone who presided over that. Nobody died, right? Bear that in mind. You're going to find it really hard. So even if it's not financial services. Reputationally, there is a lot at stake, right? So my reason for drawing these pen portraits is being a board member has changed massively from 10 years ago. Do not do it as a nice, easy into retirement. Do consider it seriously if you care about shaping the world that we live in. Which brings me on to the first question you need to ask yourself when you become a board member, and that is, what is your motivation? Why do you really want to do it? Do you want to do it because you want to change the world? That's a good answer. Do you want to do it because you think big business, big institutions could be run better? That's a good reason. Do you think you want to do it because you want to hold certain organizations more accountable for their role in society? That's a good reason. Think about your motivations. Do you want to do it for the money? I'm going to come on to money, right? Board positions in the FTSE 100 pay well. On average, it's about 270,000 UK pounds a year for reportedly about 40 days work. It is never 40 days work for a FTSE 100. It is about a third of your working time in a year, minimum. Sometimes if something's going wrong, it'll be half of your time working hours, about 100 days a year, if something's going wrong in that organization. Last year, board members worked their socks off, right? Because we were all in a pandemic, right? And companies were running out of cash. So you got to ask yourself, I'm not going to say is £250,000 good money or not. Like, I'd say it's crap money if you're not enjoying what you're doing and you don't think it's for a good reason. And the reason I say that is, I don't know how old everyone is out there in our audience. I am going to be 50 this year. And I certainly found that when I became a mother at 40, I realized the most precious thing in my life, besides my family, was my time. And after a certain level of kind of, comfortable, let's just call it comfortable life, no more money is going to make you happier, but having a sense of fulfillment because you really believe in what you're doing, that is the only reason I go to work. Otherwise, I would rather spend my time with my family, right? So when you decide to do a board position, be really invested in the industry that you want to go into. Care about it enough, because here's the thing that you're going to find. You're going to find yourself with a board meeting on Monday. You're going to have a board pack delivered to you, somewhere between 200 to 500 pages of A4 to read, probably on the Thursday before. You've got your working week to finish. You've got Saturday and Sunday, probably the only free time you're going to have. And you're going to spend at least 9 hours reading those pages. A 300-page board pack takes about 9 hours to read. That's my world. So that's how I know that data. So where are you going to find those 9 hours? Well, you're going to find that time kind of crammed in first thing in the morning, last thing at night, in between kind of car journeys and tennis classes for your kids. You're going to find it, and you're only going to enjoy doing it and not resent doing it if you love what you do and and you believe in what that company is going to do, right? So that's why I sort of say, choose your sector wisely and do it for the right reasons. I think we can talk about, like, a bit later on, the payoff. Why do it? There are benefits for sure beside the money, but don't be led by the money, because I think you deserve more. I think you deserve to feel kind of like you're changing the world.
That's a great point. I'm going to ask the audience to keep throwing in questions in the channel. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going down some of the questions I had planned. So I think you've level set expectations for people in terms of incentives and process and expectations. We're having this call now. I personally think it is a great time for women of color to ascend to boards. I have my own opinions for why I think that is. But I wanted to ask you, Dineshi, why you thought getting a board role now of any type, whether it's philanthropic, corporate, public or private, why is in the zeitgeist now, and how do these women fare today versus even 2 years ago?
Yeah. So Power Woman's mission that, or kind of mantra, your time is now, couldn't be more appropriate to this topic. So I'm gonna like two stats that most of you will be familiar with. One is about women. So first of all, 30%, and sorry, my data is very UK centric, forgive me. 30% of FTSE 100, so our premium listed companies, largest companies in the UK, public ones, 30% of their board members are women. This is up from 12% 10 years ago. Yeah. So not quite trebled, but kind of like 50, more than 50% increase in the last 10 years. Is that good progress? Pretty much. There was a government target, a regulated target that was set, and it was largely met last year. Yeah. So, okay, great. So women on board, a thing, super. But if you dig a little bit below that number and you look at succession, so you look at the executive level, that number is nowhere near as strong. You're looking at the teens in terms of percentages of women on executive committees. Yeah. So it's, we've got a lot of work. The pipeline in terms of leadership at the executive level is lower. Then if you look at people of color, people, not women, anyone of color, on those same boards, 7% are of the FTSE 350 board directors are of color. So the number is way below than the aspiration, right? So why is that a thing? So that came into sharp focus even before Black Lives Matter last year, because of something called the Parker Review in the UK, which was a review that was conducted in the House of Lords around this problem. And is it valuable to have people of color on leadership teams, particularly boards? And the data pointed to the answer, which was, yeah, a resounding yes. Why? Because it leads to diversity of thinking amongst the board. Why is diversity of thinking amongst the board important? Because it's representative of society. So if boards make decisions that are in the interest of the broadest swathe of society, well, that's going to be a better thing than just considering a certain demographic, right? So that's part of it. But then I'm going to say something that, some of you, I'm just going to just say it because it's a very personal view, and the optics are important too, right? So what I've noticed is, even though the data has been compelling for having women on boards, in that it drives, Simran shared some of those statistics, it drives value, it reduces risk. That data is irrefutable. There's a 2018 McKinsey study. If you want to look at the data, just Google it. Women on boards add value, right? So that goes without saying. But what I've noticed about the whole BAME argument, anyone from an ethnic minority or people of color, is that it's almost people aren't asking for the data. They're doing it because it just feels like the right thing to do. And this has been driven, or momentum has gathered for this post Black Lives Matter. So people are interested in women. They are even more interested in women of color to join their boards. So, yeah.
This is your time, ladies. This is your time. And we're going to run a second poll here in a little bit, but while we're doing that, I would say in my own personal experience, that's absolutely the point. I just started engaging in the inquiries question we asked. I just started doing inquiries last year in Q4 and a little bit in Q1, thinking, oh, I'm 48. I'll probably have to start my networking now so I can get something when I'm in my mid 50s or late 50s. No, the time is now. I'm getting traction now with FTSE 100 companies who are looking for women of color. You have to be, of course, competent and have some of the specs that they're looking for. But I also come with some ESG and sustainability experience, which is really top of mind for many people's corporate and political agendas too. So don't underestimate yourself. if you're wondering, is now the time, and if I'm board ready, you won't know unless you try. With that, why don't we throw up the second poll, Simran, so we can get to some practicalities. And Alyssa, this will speak to some of the things you were thinking about. Looks like people really want, what is the underpinning of a board role? What does it actually mean in terms of time commitment, adding value, followed closely by CV, industries, et cetera. And these were some of the questions that we had queued up as well. So let's get to the practicalities of how you're going to do the tactics. So let's say you feel ready, you want to start your journey now, you're ready to start inquiries. Let's get down to brass tacks. So Dineshi, there are a lot of board preparatory networks, classes, certification programs. Maybe answer to the women, is it, in your opinion, worth the time and the money? Is this a nice to have or a must have? And will it give you that extra sparkle or credential when you're looking at boards? Does something like that help?
Yeah, I think it's worth investing in to give you confidence to when you walk into your first role. I don't know that a recruiter would look at the fact that you have, I don't know, completed a diploma with the London Business School or Henley Management School, or whatever. I think INSEAD have a program. I don't think they would look at that and kind of go, ooh, that makes this person a really interesting candidate. I don't know that it works that way. I think what trumps that is, as you said, Dimple, your experience in management and your sector knowledge. Yeah, I think that's what trumps. So your experience and expertise comes first, and then I would say yes, invest in them, but don't do it before you start looking for your role. Look for your role, see what people are asking for, and they know that a lot of, particularly the female candidates that they're looking for, then they won't have previous board roles, and that's okay. Well, then what they look for is quality management experience, and that doesn't need to necessarily be as a CXO. It could be, as Dimple has, investor kind of experience. It could be, it could be a variety of things. You could be a climatologist. You could have particular expertise in blockchain, and if they're a financial service company, well, that might be the thing that they're really looking for. So experience trumps, in this case, education.
I think you have to do a gap analysis between the company you're targeting, and presumably something about the products and services of the company, because that's why you think you have that competitive edge and some insight to add. And then there's usually sometimes there's board specs as well, like a job description. So you'll be able to see if you can do a gap analysis between what you have and what the expectations are. So we talked a little bit about, I think Alyssa was asking about interviews and prepping for that. I mean, for me, in my experience, I've had a couple of interviews for public boards now. I think it's about, you should, as you do with any interview, prepare 2 or 3 little small vignettes of your career arc. So, a time where you've demonstrated governance capability, if you've never done it before, where you've influenced someone who was much more senior than you and gotten them around to your way of thinking, or you've managed something, or you've managed a committee, right? And worked in agile teams. So I think it's good to, one, of course, know your background, know why you want to interview at the company, what value you're bringing, but then your experience that serves as a proxy for what it would be like to be on the board, and prepare 2 or 3 little stories or vignettes that you can point to, like, oh, one time I did this, and there was another time where I had to do that. And that grounds it again in some realities. And then, of course, I want to talk about headhunters here, but there are also deliverables. Like, there are things in the market like board bios, board resumes. And when you talk to headhunters and recruiters, some of them will have templates. You might even find them on Google. but there's a different way to display your background from a board position versus an executive position. The things you highlight are very, very different. They're synergistic, but they're different. So speaking of headhunters, oh, actually, we have another question. Forget about my monotone voice. Let's go here to some questions. Okay. Great. So someone, it's called under iPhone. So I'm just going to ask this question because I don't know how to call you out by name. Ms. iPhone asks, what are the best job boards to explore these roles? Are there job boards where board positions are listed? I think not, but tell me.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to getting exposure to what's out there, what's available, there are kind of the sort of market segments into two. There are the big firms that you kind of hear about, like Spencer Stewart, Odgers, Korn Ferry, any of these very large headhunters who recruit for CEO, CXO roles. They will often have a board practice, and they've diversified into that realm. So there's that, right? I mean, like, okay, fine. Like, if you're familiar with them, you've used them before, well, then kind of course, go there. The other thing that I see is a much more slightly newer age, newer kind of, I guess you could call them challenges, right, to the established firms. And here there are companies, there's one in the UK called Dynamic Boards. It's run by a lady called Scarlett Brown, who I do a lot of work with. And they hire everything, and these are paid board roles, but it's starting at the slightly other end of the spectrum. So positions sometimes in the public sector, working for public services, but also working for some of the roles that perhaps you might not know from the big brands that you see in the FTSE 100, right? So yeah, Alyssa's mentioned new role. I know the lady who set that up. And yes, new role is another one of the dynamic boards. Now, how do these outfits operate? And Dimple's sharing some others. So what I tend to find is I spoke to a board member, and kind of old guard board chairman, and he said, oh, and this wasn't last year, this was 2019. He said, Dinesh, it's really, really hard to find a female candidate for this role. And it's just like, yeah, oh really? Okay. So what was your shortlist kind of process was like? Well, we had the skills that we were looking for, and then we went to a recruitment firm, and we specifically asked for female candidates, and we weighed the skills against the female candidates, and on the shortlist we had about 5. One of them was a woman, 4 of them were guys. We ended up choosing a guy. And I was like, oh, that's a bit disappointing, isn't it? I was like, what if you just said that you would only have a female shortlist? Might you have searched differently? Might you have had 5 women to choose from rather than 1? And he was like, oh, well, I mean, like, we could have done that. Well, I don't know if, our headhunter said that they couldn't find. Who did you use? One of the old guard. Interesting, right? The old guard are going through this learning curve, and they fish from the gold-plated pool, quite known, quite well established, all former CEOs, CFOs. If you kind of don't have that experience, that was then. That was about 3 years ago. Now they're finding that actually some of the most interesting people are being sourced by these scrappy new challengers, right? And these are people who are in their 40s, in executive roles, not looking for a board position, and they actively go out and search for them, right? So they're not being offered CVs, they're actively going out and searching for them. And so what this tells me is, if you're in an executive position, just as Dimple said, don't wait until, you've had your run as being a CHRO or whatever. Kind of, just kind of go, yeah, okay, if this is a sector I want to work in, offer up a CV, and yes, get a selection of them. And as Dimple said, just go out and try. Begin having a few conversations, test the water, see what you like. I personally don't like headhunters. I've refused to kind of, in all my career, refused to kind of work with them. I've applied for jobs that I've seen in newspapers. I've been approached for other jobs, but I just hate the way that they stereotype people. I'm confident that that is not the world today. So kind of get out there. So the other dynamic I see in some of these large firms is they go in and fish from their pool. They try really hard and they're not getting the candidate. So what they do is they partner with other smaller firms and to actually boost the shortlist that they come up with. So actually you're getting this cross-fertilization. So even if you haven't submitted your CV to a Spencer Stewart, they might even get your CV put forward to them via a new role or a dynamic boards, because these other companies are working harder to find the right candidates, women of color, with the very niche experience that they're looking for. So, so this gives me confidence that the net is being thrown wider. It's not an old boys club, which is what was in the city 10 years ago.
Exactly. Male, pale, and stale, as we like to say. Okay, we're going to go to another question by Melissa. Melissa, I don't know if you're on the call, you want to unmute and ask the question or get off a video, but go ahead.
Well, I'm not in a very bright area, so I've switched my video off, but okay. I can ask the question. And Dimple, this was really, going back to what you said about your ESP experience being an asset. And the question that I had was, besides domain expertise and experience, what are other areas of expertise that boards are looking for, particularly in the current environment? What do they really value?
So I'll take this question, Dineshi, since I've been going through the process and talking with recruiters, business school classmates, and mentors and advisors. By the way, another secret tip, I think, is find a sponsor who's already on a public board. So, and I don't mean a mentor, I mean a sponsor, like where there's a little bit more activism behind it, where it could be a white male who's already serving on a board and he's going to champion you the next time a term seat comes up. So I think that's really important as well. Find those people in your network who can be sponsors for you on your board journey. So I happen to be really passionate about impact investing. I've been doing it for 15 years. For me, it's my way of exacting social justice. And so sustainability and ESG is naturally a part of that whole impact, social impact, right? It's racial justice, it's climate, it's bottom of the pyramid populations, it's access to finance. So it just so happens that in the last few years, in the zeitgeist came #TimesUpMeToo, which meant women's voices were once again really top of mind and were amplified, followed by Black Lives Matter, which meant certainly African-American, Black, but all ethnicities were raised and leaning into their ethnicities from a position of strength. So diversity and inclusion became really important. And now climate, it's all everyone can talk about. We're all experiencing climate change, from snowstorms in Texas to, typhoons in the developing world, and, really hot summers in Europe where we have no air conditioning here because we're not built for it. So I think you can't avoid climate. So ESG also happens. So all these things triangulate, these micro trends, which meant someone like me all of a sudden becomes very attractive. Other little micro trends that I've been noticing, and this is as an investor now, digital transformation. So a lot of companies really need help thinking about all of their products and services and how to extend and use an omni-channel approach, a digital transformation in their business, right? So how do you extend your reach to people? How do you interact with them? How do you use deep tech, AI, AR, VR? So if you're a digital transformation expert, I think that's really helpful for a lot of companies. I mentioned something about cross-border as well. If you're someone who has experience working across multiple geographies, if you're multilingual, if you're a global citizen, multiple passports, guess what? You are the archetype of board member people want now, because you can compare things versus other regions. you can learn, you can leapfrog. And so having a a global perspective is really, really important. And most of us who are on this call are, Indian European, Indian American. And so you're multi-culti, whether you thought you were or not. So I think playing that up and showing that you've seen first world developments and third world developments, or however you want to phrase it, but I think that's super important. And then, so those are the 2 or 3, and I wanted to say a plug for HR as well. So I think there's going to be new committees on boards. So you have your audit, risk, remuneration committees, and those will always be there. You will have ESG committees now. You will also, I think, have diversity and inclusion committees. So if you're someone who's coming from HR, people management, organizational development, I think these are soft skills that most companies are also going to really now catapult up. If you read any shareholder votes now, people are asking for, employee executive compensation. Is it fair or not? And shareholders want transparency into who's making how what. So I think people with an HR, people, organizational development background, there's going to be people committees now as well. So I would say those are 2 or 3 really explicit skill sets based on my own conversations that I've heard people will need. Dineshi, Simran, anybody else want to contribute? Just speak up.
No,
I have a question. So one is, and thank you, Dineshi and Dimple, for a great insight into the whole topic. My question is that, so one is that we're talking about choosing the sector of our interests and where our expertise lies. The other is, looking at a company with ethical practices. So how does one go about navigating and understanding which company to really choose?
I know in my own search, the guidance I gave to people who were sourcing things for me, headhunters, friends, I said, if I don't share the same values as that company, I won't join it. So me being an impact investor, I would never join the board of Shell, or British Petroleum. And like any other investment, you have to do your due diligence. So a part of my interviews will be talking to existing board members and triangulating what I know about the company and other people involved. But I'm used to that because I'm an investor, so I know how to do due diligence. But think about ways to do that. And then I only interview with public companies that have a social impact, which limits it.
Yeah. And you can do a lot of kind of this your own research, kind of looking at annual reports, looking at some of the ESG kind of indices. Also, there's a lot of commentary around that. But then fundamentally, I in particular look at the business model. So how does this company create a pound of value? What do they do? And at what cost does that come? And that goes back to your own values. And so I think Dimple's spot on. And it's, so I kind of in answer to your question, the sector, or I would sooner be driven by your skill set than a sector, but then I would kind of have in your mind an ideal company that you would love to work with, because I tend to find it's easier to identify what you don't like and what you do like, rather than saying something in the middle. So rather than, sort of saying, let's say if you took FMCG, and, I think Bayer is kind of in that kind of zone. And then also in that zone, you've got kind of Unilever, and then you've got Reckitt Benckiser, and then you've got Procter & Gamble and Mars. Okay, so that's a sector, FMCG. I would never work for Bayer. Let's say that's what I want to do in FMCG, because I know, and their track record, but also what they're doing with GMO crops, that wouldn't fit with me. So then I'm looking at Mars and P&G and Unilever. And then so what I would look there for is what's the leadership like? What's the track record of that CEO? and some of the other people in the executive team. That will give you a feel for the value set and how they do business. Read their annual reports. Find yourself a sense of what you really like and what you really don't like. And that will help you hone in on some of, give you a feel for what you're leaning towards. It may not be the company, but this is, you know, if you were given a wish and you could just jump onto the board of your choice, well, this is the one I would go for. So get a sense of what that is, and use values and culture to guide your thinking.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just mindful of the time, and I know some people have to leave sharp on time. I want to thank Dineshi and Dimple and everyone who's joined. It was actually a very nice discussion because we went really high up. Also, you know, the whole philosophical thing, why you want to do some things. And Dinesh, it was great that you also brought out the more serious aspect, think about it well. And then we also went into the tactical bits, where to reach out and resources. Thank you, both of you, for sharing your experience. And I really, really hope that many of us here who are listening will go on and sit on why only, you know, startup boards, but also in larger companies. And as you said, Dineshi, more for the reason of bringing about change and looking at the world as we want it to be.